You're listening to TV Tangents. And today we're just bringing you a short episode with a fun fact that I'm going to tell Natalie that she may not already know. Natalie, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Rebecca.
I know you know who Richard Belzer is.
I do.
Because we had this discussion previously, and I don't remember why. What was he on that we were talking about?
Well, Richard Belzer plays a longtime character on Law & Order SVU,
right.
John Munch. I believe we talked about him possibly when we did Happy Days because his cousin is Winkler.
Henry
Winkler.
Okay, maybe.
And I feel like that's why we talked about him. Although I feel like there's another episode. There's another reason we talked about him, and now I can't remember why.
Because that's where we discovered that we know him as completely different people. Because obviously I know he was on Law & Order, but I cannot see him as a serious guy because I know him as a stand-up comedian.
Oh, okay.
Because he started as a stand-up comedian.
Gotcha.
And I never really watched Law & Order.
Yeah.
So I just don't remember what we were watching.
Yeah.
But
somebody let us know that because, like, go to our archives for us and tell us what we were talking
let us
about.
Because we can't remember.
Yeah, it was something completely off, I think.
Yeah, he was in something or he showed up in something or something. And then I was like, yeah.
Yeah.
So we had this discussion before. But
yeah.
I'm going to tell you about the time he had a beef with Hulk Hogan.
Oh, interesting.
You know who Hulk Hogan is.
I do know who Hulk Hogan is.
Professional wrestler.
Professional wrestler from our childhood.
Right. So, like, he was the professional wrestler in our childhood. That's like, if you didn't know professional wrestling in the 80s, you knew who Hulk Hogan was.
You still knew, didn't watch it really, but they were like that. It was way more, it feels like it was way more promoted when we were younger, but maybe more.
It was like, there were Hulk Hogan dolls.
Yeah.
I feel like there was a cartoon even.
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, Richard Belzer, like you said, was Detective John Munch on Law & Order. But in the mid-'80s, he was still just a stand-up comedian.
Okay.
And he had a few small parts, and they tried to give him a couple talk shows that didn't really work out. He also did a Ronald Reagan impression on a lot of like late-night talk shows.
Interesting.
In 85, he hosted a show called Hot Properties. And it was like kind of a interview show.
Okay.
I don't remember what channel it was on, but it seemed like an MTV show, but I don't think it was. It was like in that style. One episode featured Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. Of course, you know who Mr. T is. And they were promoting the very first WrestleMania, which was about to be on TV in 1985. So first, Richard interviewed, and by the way, you can see this whole thing on YouTube. Okay. He interviewed Mr. T, and you know, Richard Belzer is he kind of comes off as a jerk in his interviews, and he's kind of like poking at Mr. T, and Mr. T is just annoyed with him, and he's like done. And then Hulk Hogan comes out, and he's explaining professional wrestling to Richard Belzer because he's like, you know, like there's a lot of choreography that goes into it so people don't get hurt. So Richard Belzer is like, can you show me a move? And Hulk Hogan says, I don't think I should because you're not a professional wrestler and you could get hurt. And so he didn't really want to. But then Richard Belzer keeps poking at him. And he's like, fine. And I don't know how like planned this was or not, but they went over to like the side of the stage. Hogan, also Mr. T is over there going, like really mess him up. Oh, so Hulk Hogan put Richard Belzer in a front chin lock, which is where like Richard Belzer, like Hulk Hogan had his arms folded in front of him, and Richard Belzer's neck and arms were over his, like pressed up against Hulk Hogan's chest.
Yeah.
So he's like, Richard Belzer is facing him.
Yeah.
and he's hunched over.
Okay.
And so this cut off his airway.
Oh, jeez.
And he passed out.
Oh, Lord.
So you can see him go limp.
Yeah.
But, and Mr. T was like, yeah, like shut him up for a while. Well, Hulk Hogan didn't realize that he had passed out. And so he released him.
Oh.
He just like let him go. And he fell to the floor and onto the tile, like hit his head on the tile.
Oh,
and
no.
You can see like he was out
Yeah.
on the floor for like 15 seconds.
Oh, jeez.
And then he came to and he jumped up and like he said later that he kind of woke up and knew that he was doing a TV show and like jumped up and
jumped back into like, I needed to be talking.
Like hosting. And he was like, okay, we're going to go to a commercial.
Oh my God.
But you can also see that he's like bleeding from the back of his head.
Oh my God.
You couldn't see this on YouTube. It's so terrifying. Like,
eek.
Ew, it's so gross. I watched it like 4 times. But anyway, he was briefly hospitalized. Jeez. He had a large laceration on the back of his head. And he sued Hulk Hogan and the World Wrestling Federation, which is now the WWE. And he settled for $400,000, which is about $1.1 million today. Mm-hmm. And he used the money to buy a home in France, which he named Shea Hogan.
My God.
And he lived there for the rest of his life. So,
wow.
You'd never heard of that before?
I had never heard of that before. And I find it interesting knowing, I mean, I feel like for as long as I've ever seen any part of Richard Belzer, that he's a ridiculously skinny guy. Uh-huh. So that also just terrifies me to think that he would even think it would be okay to ask for that and or poke either of those two.
Seriously. I'm like I was so uncomfortable when he was interviewing Mr. T. I'm like, dude, that's Mr. T. Mm-hmm. And Hulk Hogan said that he explained it. So after like they came back from commercial break, it was like one of the producers or somebody was sitting with those two, and like Richard Belzer was gone to the hospital, and he explained he was like interviewing Hulk Hogan, and he's like how did this happen? Whatever. He's like, well, I mean, someone who's trained to do this gives you a signal when they've had enough.
Yeah.
But he didn't give me the signal, and he's like, I didn't put that much pressure on him. But he's a skinny guy and like he's not a professional, so I didn't realize it wouldn't take that much to knock him out.
Right.
Like he's not supposed to be knocked out. That's not the point.
Yeah.
So he's like, yeah, it was an accident, whatever. And like it was so uncomfortable at the end of this show. And so yeah.
That's crazy.
That's an iconic TV moment that people don't really know about. But I mean, Richard Belzer is a big personality, and that was always his thing, is kind of like to poke at people and to be kind of insulting and surly, and you know, he's that kind of guy.
Yeah. It's so funny just knowing, like, my whole essence of knowing him is his being a detective on SVU, and it's just so funny because he's kind of like the crotchety old guy detective, and he's also like, he's known, although in real life he was also like a conspiracy theorist kind of guy, and he is that way on the show. They tease him for it on the show. And they're like, oh, you know, it's another Munch around here if somebody's paranoid about something. He left the show years ago, and it's still on, but he makes a rare appearance every once in a while. He comes back around to help solve a case, or he did anyway. He passed away. But yeah.
Okay.
Aw, Richard Belzer.
So that's a fun fact. I wouldn't call it a fun fact,
no.
but it's a fact.
It's an interesting fact.
It's certainly a fact.
It is kind of a fun fact just because luckily he's okay.
Right. He made a lot of money off of it.
Yeah, that is so bizarre though. Yeah. But it's interesting if he was like a reporter, then you're like, sometimes they'll just do anything to get a good story. Mm-hmm.
I know. Yeah. He was like, he was challenging him. Like, what, are you afraid to do this and whatever?
Interesting.
Yeah. But that was the first WrestleMania that they were promoting, and which is funny because I could have sworn WrestleMania was older than that, but 1985 seems pretty.
Wrestling was around, just not WrestleMania, which I think is the big ones. And is that what it's called? Oh, now it's called Raw or something. Like they have their big.
It's WWE Raw or something. Yeah. I don't know. I don't follow wrestling.
I don't either, but it's on. Well, this ties in together because there's episodes of Law and Order SVU that they replay on USA, the network, and then that's the network that Raw airs on.
Yeah.
So
I do remember that.
sometimes I'll be randomly watching it and then it turns into Raw. And I'm like, and turn the channel.
And we're done.
So
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks for listening
yay.
to my rant about Richard Belzer. I have so many
I love it.
random facts in my head, and I put a lot of them on our TikToks because what else am I going to do with the things in my head?
I know. Gotta put them somewhere.
Make 1 minute videos about them.
There you go.
All right.
Love it.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up.
Wrap it up.